The scent of burnt coffee and cheap air freshener was the official perfume of the ninth floor, but Clara had long since grown immune to it. For her, the office was a battlefield, and the Olympus campaign was the hill she was determined to conquer. For 6 months, Olympus had been her world. It was her late nights, her skipped lunches, her weekend scribbles that turned into groundbreaking strategies. It was a marketing campaign so ambitious, so meticulously crafted, that it had the potential to redefine the company's entire market position. And it was hers, from the first spark of an idea to the final polished presentation sitting on her desk. Her name, however, appeared nowhere on it. The title slide read, in bold, authoritative letters, "The Olympus Campaign, a Strategic Overview by Mark Thompson." Mr. Thompson, her boss, liked to call her his assistant. It was a title that felt like a cage, too small and confining for the work she actually did. He would often say it with a dismissive wave of his hand, especially when introducing her to someone from another department. "This is Clara, my assistant. She helps with scheduling and other things." Those other things were the lifeblood of the division. They were the market analyses he presented as his own, the client reports he barely glanced at before signing, and the creative concepts he claimed to have developed during his morning commute. This morning was different. It was the day of the big pitch. Mr. Sterling, the company's CEO, was flying in specifically for this meeting. He was a figure of legend within the company, a man who had started in the mailroom and now commanded their global empire. He was known for his sharp eye and his intolerance for incompetence. An approval from Mr. Sterling for the Olympus campaign wouldn't just be a professional victory, it would be a revolution. "Clara, is the presentation ready?" Mr. Thompson's voice boomed from his office. He hadn't arrived yet, but he had a habit of calling 10 minutes before he walked in, as if to announce his impending presence. "Yes, Mr. Thompson," Clara replied, her voice steady. "The final deck is on your desk. A printed copy is in your leather portfolio, and I've emailed it to you and loaded it onto the conference room server. And the projections? Did you double-check the Q3 growth estimates?" "I triple-checked them," she said, looking at the complex spreadsheet she had spent most of yesterday refining. "The data is solid." A moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Good. Don't want any slip-ups. Sterling is a shark. One drop of blood in the water, and he'll tear us apart." "He'll tear you apart," Clara thought, but held her tongue. When Mr. Thompson finally breezed in, he was a whirlwind of self-importance, his tie slightly askew and his hair still damp. He strode past Clara's desk without a glance, grabbing the portfolio. He flipped through the first few pages of the presentation, nodding to himself as if reviewing his own masterful work. "Looks good," he declared to the room at large. "Simple, punchy, to the point. That's how you handle a man like Sterling." He finally turned his attention to her. "Now, Clara, this meeting is top level. Just the department heads and the board. I need you here, holding down the fort. Answer the phones, make sure no one disturbs us. This is the big leagues, you understand?" It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal. He was drawing a line in the sand, placing her firmly on the side of secretaries and receptionists, while he prepared to stand in the spotlight and present her genius as his own. She felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach, a bitter mix of frustration and resignation. She had told herself it was enough to do the work, to know in her heart that she was the architect of their success. But as he turned to walk toward the glass-walled conference room, her creation tucked under his arm, she felt a surge of something new. It was a quiet, simmering anger. All she could do was nod. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Good luck." He just grunted in response, already focused on the applause he was sure he would receive. Clara watched him go, her hands curling into fists under her desk. She took a deep breath, the stale office air doing little to calm the storm brewing inside her. She had built the mountain. He was just the man planting a flag on its peak. From her desk, Clara had a clear, if silent, view into the conference room. It felt like watching a film with the sound turned off. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim, focused faces of the department heads and board members. At the head of the table sat Mr. Sterling. He was leaner than she had imagined, with a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. He listened without expression, his fingers steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed on Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, on the other hand, was all performance. He gestured emphatically at the screen, a confident smile plastered on his face. He paced back and forth, owning the space, a master showman delivering the performance of a lifetime. Clara watched as he clicked through her slides. There was her graph illustrating market penetration, the one that had taken her a full weekend to perfect. There was the tagline, "Olympus, ascend to your peak," that she had conceived at 3 a.m. after 3 pots of coffee. He delivered the lines she had written in the speaker notes, and a few of the board members nodded in appreciation. For a moment, a wave of nausea washed over Clara. This was worse than just not getting credit. It was watching someone else wear her skin. For the first 20 minutes, things appeared to be going flawlessly. The board seemed impressed. Mr. Thompson's smile grew wider, his gestures bolder. He was nearing the climax of the presentation, the financial projections. This was the heart of the campaign, the numbers that promised unprecedented returns. He put up the summary slide, a beautiful, easy-to-read infographic that distilled pages of complex data into a single, powerful image. He was about to launch into his triumphant conclusion when Mr. Sterling slowly raised a hand. The gesture was quiet, almost casual, but it cut through the room's atmosphere like a razor. Mr. Thompson stopped mid-sentence, his smile faltering for the first time. Even from behind the glass, Clara could see the intensity in Mr. Sterling's eyes. He didn't address Mr. Thompson. Instead, he spoke to the room, though his question was clearly aimed at the presenter. His voice was too low to hear, but his body language was unmistakable. He pointed a single, steady finger at a small section of the projections on the screen. It was a specific data point related to forecasted user engagement in the second quarter of the launch year. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She knew that number. She knew it intimately. It was an anomaly she had spent days investigating. It looked like a dip, a slight downturn before a massive spike in the third quarter. It was counterintuitive, but it was based on solid data regarding seasonal market trends and a planned secondary media push. She had written a detailed 3-page appendix explaining the methodology behind that specific forecast. An appendix she was certain Mr. Thompson had never read. Inside the room, Mr. Thompson squinted at the screen. He cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, and bought a moment by taking a long sip of water. He tried to answer, but from his evasive posture and the way he avoided looking directly at Mr. Sterling, Clara knew he was bluffing. He was giving a vague, corporate-speak response about synergies and market dynamics. Mr. Sterling did not move. He let Mr. Thompson finish his rambling, non-answer, the silence in the room growing heavier with each passing second. When Mr. Thompson trailed off, Mr. Sterling spoke again, his expression unchanged. He gestured at the screen once more, clearly not satisfied. The other executives at the table began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The shark had found its drop of blood, and he was not letting go. Mr. Thompson's face was now visibly flushed. The confident showman had vanished, replaced by a cornered man, sweating under the expensive lights of the boardroom. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a lifeline. And then, they found her. Through the glass, his gaze locked with Clara's. For a split second, she saw pure, undiluted panic. It was quickly replaced by a flash of anger. He turned his back to Mr. Sterling and strode to the glass door. He yanked it open, the sudden noise making Clara jump. "Clara," he said, his voice a harsh, strained whisper that was loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "Where is the file on the Q2 engagement metrics? The appendix. I can't find it in this deck." He was trying to frame it as her mistake, a filing error. He paused, then added, for the benefit of the room, "My assistant handles the organization of the supplementary materials." His voice dripped with condescension, a clear attempt to shift the blame. He was summoning her into the lion's den, not for her expertise, but to be his scapegoat. For a heartbeat, Clara was frozen. The entire office floor had gone silent, all eyes on her and the open door to the conference room. This was the moment she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways. In some versions, she shrank away, emailing the file and allowing him to take the credit. In others, she stood up and shouted the truth. But now, in the stark reality of the moment, with the weight of every gaze upon her, she felt a strange and sudden calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She had done the work. She knew the answers. The cage door was open. She didn't reach for her computer to email a file. She didn't offer a meek apology for the non-existent error. Instead, she stood up slowly, her back straight, her chin high. She picked up a single, unmarked file folder from her desk, the one containing her personal, heavily annotated copy of the appendix, and walked toward the conference room. Every step felt deliberate, amplified by the dead silence of the office. The air crackled with a tension that was almost palpable. As she passed Mr. Thompson in the doorway, she didn't look at him. She walked directly into the room, her focus entirely on the man at the head of the table. She stopped at the edge of the mahogany expanse, a lone figure in a room of titans. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, resonating in the quiet room. "My name is Clara. The number you are pointing to represents a projected seasonal dip in engagement. It's based on a comparative analysis of the last 5 major product launches in this sector, adjusted for current market volatility." A murmur went through the board members. Mr. Thompson, who had followed her in, stood gaping by the door, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "We anticipate this dip because the primary launch campaign is media-heavy and geared toward mass-market acquisition," Clara continued, opening her folder and placing the first page on the table. It was a chart comparing spending and engagement cycles. "However, the Q2 lull is a strategic buffer. It allows for the organic user-generated content cycle to begin, which we will then amplify in Q3 with a targeted secondary campaign focused on community building and influencer partnerships. That is where the exponential growth curve you see later comes from. The initial dip is not a weakness, it's the foundation for a more sustainable, long-term surge." She didn't just provide an answer. She delivered a micro-presentation, concise and irrefutable. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who hadn't just memorized the facts, but had lived with them, wrestled with them, and molded them into a winning strategy. Mr. Sterling had not taken his eyes off her. His expression remained unreadable, but the sheer focus of his attention was unnerving. When Clara finished, he was silent for a long moment. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and precise. "Who are you?" Before Clara could answer, Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his composure partially restored. He forced a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. "This is Clara, my assistant, as I mentioned. She helps with the data compilation. Clearly, she takes her role very seriously. A little overzealous, perhaps." He was trying to minimize her to put her back in her box. "Thank you, Clara. That will be all. You can return to your desk." He gestured dismissively toward the door, but Clara did not move. Her gaze remained locked on Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling ignored Mr. Thompson completely, as if he were a piece of furniture. His eyes, sharp and analytical, were still fixed on Clara. "That wasn't data compilation," he said, his voice cutting through Thompson's bluster. "That was strategy. The entire premise of this campaign's long-term success hinges on that single counterintuitive insight. An insight that was not explained in the main presentation." He finally shifted his gaze, turning his head slowly to look at Mr. Thompson. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I asked you about it, and you knew nothing. You tried to blame your assistant for a missing file. But she walked in here with no notes and explained the core of the financial model in 30 seconds. He paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. Then he looked back at Clara. "So I will ask again," Mr. Sterling said, his voice now holding a clear edge of command. "Who are you?" This time Clara felt the last of her hesitation fall away. She met his gaze and answered, simply and truthfully, "I'm the one who runs this entire campaign division." The silence that followed Clara's statement was not empty. It was heavy, charged with the weight of a truth finally spoken aloud. It was a silence that made Mr. Thompson's previous blustering seem hollow and absurd. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of shock, intrigue, and, in some cases, dawning respect. They were looking at her now, truly seeing her for the first time. Mr. Thompson's face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. "That is an outrageous and insubordinate lie," he sputtered, finally finding his voice. "Mr. Sterling, she is a disgruntled junior employee. This is a pathetic attempt to sabotage a vital presentation. I demand that she be removed by security." Mr. Sterling didn't even glance at him. He held up a hand, and the sheer authority in the gesture silenced Thompson instantly. He looked at the appendix page Clara had placed on the table, then back at her. "If you run this division, Mr. Sterling said, his tone dangerously calm, then you should be able to answer this. The projected marketing spend for the Asia-Pacific launch is 15% higher than for the European sector, yet the forecasted customer acquisition rate is 8% lower. Why?" It was a sharp technical question, designed to trip up anyone who didn't know the plan inside and out. It was a detail buried deep within the budget annexes. Clara didn't hesitate. "That's correct," she affirmed, her voice as steady as his. "The cost per acquisition is higher in the APAC region due to fragmented media markets and higher localization costs for our creative assets. We have to adapt the campaign for 7 different languages and cultural contexts, which incurs significant upfront production expenses. The European market, by contrast, is more homogeneous and can be targeted with 2 master creative sets." She took a step closer to the table. "However, the projected lifetime value of an APAC customer is nearly 40% higher, The brand loyalty in that market, once established, is significantly more robust. So, while the initial cost is greater, the long-term return on investment is projected to be far superior. We're not just buying customers, we're investing in long-term brand evangelists. The numbers are detailed on page 27 of the main budget report. One of the board members, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, immediately flipped through her copy of the report. She found the page, scanned it, and then looked from the page to Clara, her eyebrows raised in clear confirmation. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. Mr. Sterling's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of something, approval perhaps, danced in his eyes. He turned his attention back to the man still fuming by the door. "Mr. Thompson," the CEO said, his voice like ice. "What is our primary contingency plan if our main social media channel partner is acquired by a competitor mid-campaign?" Thompson stared blankly. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The blood had drained from his face, leaving him looking deflated and old. He clearly had no idea. The silence stretched, becoming more and more damning with every second that passed. Clara answered for him, her tone matter of fact. "Our contingency is a pre-negotiated key man clause with a secondary channel that activates if the primary partner undergoes a change of control. We would lose approximately 3% of our projected reach in the first 2 weeks, but the financial model includes a 5% buffer for unforeseen circumstances. The transition would be almost seamless from a public-facing perspective. It's in the risk assessment folder." This time, Mr. Sterling almost smiled. He leaned back in his chair, the interrogation seemingly over. He looked around the table at the board members, then at Mr. Thompson, and finally, his gaze settled on Clara. "It seems," Mr. Sterling began, his voice resonating with finality, "that we have been listening to the wrong person. Mr. Thompson, your services in this meeting are no longer required. Please wait outside." It was a clean, brutal execution. There was no room for argument. Humiliation washed over Mr. Thompson's face. He looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the conference room, pulling the door shut behind him. Through the glass, Clara could see him slump into his own office chair, a defeated man. The room felt lighter, the air cleaner. Mr. Sterling gestured to the empty chair next to him, a seat of honor at the mahogany table. "Clara," he said, his voice now holding a note of warmth she hadn't heard before. "Please, take a seat, and walk us through your campaign. From the beginning." Taking a deep, steadying breath, Clara walked to the head of the table. The polished wood felt cool beneath her fingertips. The chair Mr. Sterling had offered her, one of the high-backed leather thrones reserved for the company's elite, was still warm. As she sat down, it felt less like taking a seat and more like ascending to a place she didn't know she had been fighting for. She looked at the faces around the table, the silver-haired woman who had fact-checked her, a stern-looking man who oversaw global finance, and others whose names she only knew from company-wide memos. They were no longer a gallery of distant, powerful figures, but her audience, her colleagues. With the remote in her hand, she didn't just restart the presentation, she resurrected it. She went back to the very first slide, her first slide, displaying the campaign title without Mr. Thompson's name. A quiet authority settled over her. The voice that came out was her own, imbued with a passion that had been silenced for too long. She didn't just present the data, she told the story behind it. "The Olympus campaign," she began, her voice resonating with a newfound confidence, "isn't about selling a product. It's about selling a feeling, the feeling of reaching a personal summit." She spoke of the late-night brainstorming sessions, the consumer focus groups where she had noticed that participants responded not to images of professional athletes, but to photos of everyday people achieving small, personal victories. A woman finishing her first 5K race, a father teaching his son to ride a bike. Mr. Thompson felt that was too sentimental. She ad-libbed, making direct eye contact with the board. He wanted celebrity endorsements. But the data showed that our target demographic is tired of unattainable perfection. They crave authenticity. They want to see themselves in the story. She clicked to a slide showing mock-ups of her proposed ads, featuring a diverse cast of real people. This is why the tagline, "Ascend to your peak," works. The peak isn't Mount Everest. For some, it's just getting through the week. Our brand should be their companion on that climb. She moved through the complex financial models with an ease that made them feel simple and logical. She explained not just what the strategy was, but why it was the only path forward. When she finished the formal presentation, she opened the floor to questions. The stern-looking finance head immediately challenged her on the risk assessment for the influencer-led Q3 push. "Ms. Clara," he said, peering over his glasses. You're allocating a significant portion of the budget to social media influencers. That's a volatile market. How can you guarantee a return on what is essentially a gamble on individual personalities? You're right, it's volatile, Clara agreed calmly, which seemed to surprise him. That's why we aren't just gambling. We've developed a 3-tiered vetting system based on engagement metrics, audience demographics, and, most importantly, brand alignment scores. Furthermore, the contracts are performance-based. We aren't paying for posts. We are paying for conversions. It's a low-risk, high-reward model that protects our investment while leveraging their authentic connection to the audience. We have a short list of 50 pre-vetted candidates in the appendix. The man leaned back, a slow, impressed smile spreading across his face. Well played. For over an hour, she commanded the room. She fielded every query, from supply chain logistics to digital privacy concerns, with a depth of knowledge that left no doubt about who the true architect of the campaign was. When she finally clicked to the last slide, a simple, powerful image of the Olympus logo against a soaring mountain peak, and said, "And that is how we will not only capture the market, but redefine it." The room was silent for a beat. Then the silver-haired woman rose to her feet and began to clap. Soon, the finance head joined her, then another board member, until the entire room was standing. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a thunderous, rolling ovation that washed over Clara, a wave of pure validation. She felt tears well in her eyes, not of sadness or frustration, but of overwhelming cathartic release. It was the sound of recognition. It was the sound of justice. After the meeting, as the board members filed out, several stopped to speak with her directly. "Incredible presentation, Clara," said the silver-haired woman, her eyes filled with genuine admiration. "A true visionary." The finance head shook her hand firmly. "You've got a brilliant head for numbers and risk. We need that." Finally, only she and Mr. Sterling remained. He walked over, his hand extended. "Clara," he said, his handshake firm and his gaze direct. "In my 30 years in this business, that was one of the 3 best strategic pitches I have ever seen. And the other 2 had a team of 5 vice presidents presenting." He paused. "Talent like yours is a rare resource. To see it being actively suppressed, that's an unforgivable waste." He let go of her hand and gestured toward the glass wall of the office. Through it, Clara could see that Mr. Thompson's office was empty. A small cardboard box, hastily packed with a few personal effects, was all that remained on his desk. His nameplate was already gone. "Don't worry about him, Mr. Sterling said, answering her unasked question. "This company is a meritocracy, or at least it strives to be. We reward talent and vision, and we have no room for those who stifle it. That division needs a leader, not a manager. The job is yours. Effective immediately. Director of Campaign Strategy. Your official offer letter will be on your desk by the end of the day, with a salary that reflects the title." He smiled, a genuine wry smile. "Your new desk, I should say. I think we can find you an office with a better view than this one." Clara stood in the now empty conference room for a long time, the applause still echoing in her ears. She walked out of the room and past her old desk, a place that now felt like a relic from another lifetime. The scent of burnt coffee and air freshener seemed to fade, replaced by the clean, crisp air of possibility. She looked at Mr. Thompson's empty office, not with malice, but with a sense of closure. He had been a gatekeeper, a barrier, but barriers were meant to be broken. She looked out the large window at the sprawling city below, the world looking different from this new vantage point. The knot of frustration she had carried for so long had finally, completely dissolved. She had walked into the office that morning as an assistant, a ghostwriter for another person's success. She was leaving it as a leader, the architect of her own destiny. Her journey had not been about a single moment of defiance, but about the quiet, relentless dedication to her work, the courage to believe in her own worth, and the strength to speak her truth when it mattered most. She had not just ascended to her peak. She had realized she was the mountain. The story of Clara is a powerful reminder that true talent cannot be hidden forever. It shows that integrity and courage are their own rewards, and that standing up for your own value can change your world in an instant. Her voice, once silenced, became the most powerful instrument in the room. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a message of hope and the courage to claim their own voice.